Production Wild Things Storytelling and Planning Preference Day at St Sidwell's Centre, Exeter, Devon, United Kingdom. Scenes 1 to close, take 1, on the 24th of the 2nd, 2011. Production company Reynolds, director Reynolds, cameraman Adam David Reynolds, sound in stereo, roll 1 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I don't know that they need to be answered. They relate more to residential care. So this is the form that everybody uses in this question. So the ones with asterisks that are more important to tick. So if you do one as if you've done Wild Things, and Richard will be here to help you. I've got to look at the storyteller. Okay. But also, even more important is the preference sheet. So this is the list of the things we might be doing this coming season. And what we'd like you to do is just go down the list and tick what you'd like to do. You can tick them all if you want, but tick what you'd like to do, and then we'll put the programme together based on what you've ticked, and then we'll hopefully invite you to things. So this is very important. We need your name and your contact number at the top. The contact number is really important. If you don't leave a contact number, you won't be contacted. It's as simple as that, really. So it's very important that you do give us a number. And at the bottom we put, if you have any ideas of your own or an activity that you've tried or missed before and would like to do again, put it there, and then maybe we'll be able to add that one as well.
Visual consent form as well. If you've not completed one, let us know if you don't want to be filmed or photographed. That's really important as well.
Visual consent form. If you haven't done one, you need to do one. Really, it's giving your consent to be put onto video or...
We've got a website, remember, there's photos back there, movie.
Going on in North Africa at the moment, and the struggle that people are having to fight for their freedom. And it's a story about a dictator who's got a son. The dictator says to his son, "When I hand over to you, I don't think you know how to govern people." And the son says, "I'll be all right, I'll be all right." He says, "You try me out any way you like. I'll be able to govern them okay." So the father says, "Well, I don't think you will. Governing a people is tough business." He says, "I'm going to give you a little test." He said, "Here's a wooden box. In the wooden box, there are 12 mice. I want you to take this box out to the big square in the middle of the city. A bit like the square in Cairo, where the real revolution happened in Egypt." He said, "Take the box out to the middle of the square, and then you open the box, and you let the mice have a little bit of a run around." Then he said, "I want you to collect up the mice, bring them back for me." So the boy takes the box full of the 12 mice, and he goes off into the middle of the square in this great city where the dictator rules. He opens the box so that the mice can have a bit of a run around, and all the mice scatter off. They disappear, they're gone, they're everywhere. He can't find any of them, he has to take back an empty box. And his father says, "There you are, you see, you've got no idea how to govern a people." He said, "Now I'll show you how you do it. Here's another wooden box with another 12 mice in it." But he said, "You take it to the square, and you open the box when you get to the square, and you let them run around for a bit, and then you bring them back to me. But," he said, "as you take the box to the square, you shake it up a bit, you shake it up, and then you let them out." And so the boy did as he was told. You do if you've got a father like that. He shook the box all the way to the square, and when the poor mice came out of the box, they were so battered about they didn't run anywhere, and he was able to take them back. And the father said, "There, that's how you do it." What a horrible story. But I heard a young woman on the radio last night, in the middle of a radio interview, and she told that story, which proves that storytelling is still alive in Egypt. Thank you, that's great. Oh, I've got a glass of water here because this is the first time I've opened my mouth in public for a month. I was ill in bed for a fortnight, really bad, and I haven't stopped coughing for a month. And I picked up the germs that I had, the chest infection, when I was telling stories at the Orchard Wassail at Stoke Gabriel, which is the 19th year that I've told stories down in this little village on the South Devon coast, where every year on 12th night they go out and sing to the apple trees to give the apple trees a wake-up call for the new year, to say we want the apple trees to bloom and to blossom and to attract the bees that will cause the apples to grow for another year. And so they go out each year and they take shotguns to fire into the apple trees, to wake up the trees and to drive away the devil. And they're firing shotguns into the night while everybody sings these wassailing songs to wake up the trees. And they have a young boy and a girl from the primary school who come out as the apple tree king and queen. And they clamber into the branches of the tree with garlands on their heads and fancy clothes, all dressed in white, which is crazy because all the trees are covered in green moss, so they get filthy dirty. But they clamber up into the trees, and they've got toast soaked in cider, and they put the toast up into the branches of the tree, and that's to feed the robins and to attract good spirits to the trees, so that the trees are woken up from their slumber. And when you look at the trees in winter, they look old and shriveled and dead. But that's why you put a young boy and a young girl up into the tree, to remind them what it's like to be young. And so for 19 years we've been doing that at Stoke Gabriel. Next year when I do it, for the 20th year. And at the end of that ceremony, there's hundreds of people around, lots of things going on. The Morris men are dancing. There's a big death and resurrection play between St George and the Turkish knight. And they have this ridiculous clownish fight in the middle of the street. And it's about the doctor that can bring the dead to life again. So it's the same idea. And all these crazy things are going on. About 400 people turned up. And at the end of the evening, I do an hour or two of storytelling. And again, you're faced with a big audience of all ages, and you're thinking, what's the right sort of story to do? And the story that I told was actually, I told the whole of the story of the return of Ulysses, which is one of the oldest stories in the world. And it's because somebody last year had asked me to do a story about archery. He was a man who was a bowman. He was a member of the English Longbow Society. He and his son did shooting longbows. And they said to me, next year we want a story about archery. And I spent the whole year thinking, what is the greatest story about archers and archery in the world? And, you know, all sorts of people came up with ideas. They said it has to be a Robin Hood story or something like that. But I decided that the greatest archery story in the world is the story of the return of Odysseus, or Ulysses as the Romans called him, who was away at the Trojan Wars, and then because the gods, or the sea god, Poseidon, was angry at him, it took him 9 more years to get home. He had this strange episode where a king called Aeolus sold him a leather bag in which all the winds that would threaten to wreck his ship had been imprisoned. All the winds were contained in this huge leather bag. Aeolus said, look, take that bag of wind, because that's all the imprisoned winds that would stand in the way of you getting home. I've imprisoned them for you because I control the wind. So all the winds that are against you are inside that great straining bag. Keep them safe in the bag and you'll get safe home. And so he's travelling with his great big triary, you know, with 3 banks of oars and huge sails. He's going back to Ithaca, his own home island, and he gets all the way back, almost within sight of his own harbour, in his own place, and there he sees his palace, and his wife Penelope has been waiting for him for 9 years, and 10 years beyond that, which was the war in Troy. So all those years she's been waiting for him, and while she's been waiting, all sorts of young men have come clustering round her saying, your husband's never coming home again, marry one of us. So she's had to put up with 108 guests in the house, pestering her to get married again, and saying, your husband's never coming home. And then he comes home, he's almost within sight of the harbour, but he's so exhausted by travel that when he sees his own land come up and he thinks, at last there's nothing else to worry about. As a captain of the ship, you always have to worry. But he says, my own land is now in sight. I don't need to worry anymore. I can relax. I can leave it to the men to steer us into port. And he decides he's going to have a deep sleep. He's not slept for nights because the captain of a ship has to be on watch all the time. And he's so tired, and he's so happy now to be home, so relaxed and at ease. He thinks we've made it after all this time. He goes off to sleep. And while he's asleep, his crew are saying, here we are. We've been through all this terrible journey, all this long voyage home. It's taken us 9 years because of the anger of the gods, but here we are at last. And what have we got to show for it? Nothing. But he has got a great big bag of treasure. He's got that great big leather bag full. He's coming back with rich rewards. He's coming back with gold and silver. We've barely got the shirts on our backs. Things have been so bad over the years. It's not fair that he should have a great bag of treasure. We should have nothing. There ought to be a share. So while their captain Odysseus is asleep, they go and investigate the leather bag because they think it's full of treasure. And as we know, the bag is full of the evil north winds of the world. And the moment that they open the bag, all these winds bluster out and they blow the ship all the way back to the start. It's like snakes and ladders. He goes all the way back to the start and wakes up and says, what the hell's going on? We're back where we started because you couldn't leave my bag alone. So that was the way that the story goes. And then when eventually he gets home, this is the part that gets the archery. He's at last, the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who is fond of him because he's a clever man, he's a wise man. Athena admires the wise. So although he's got gods against him, he's now got a goddess, Athena, who is for him. And she puts a disguise on him when he gets back home. It's not too hard to do because he's been nearly 20 years away and he's battered and he's 20 years older than he was when he went away. But Athena makes sure that when he goes back to his native land, he cannot be recognized, so that he can investigate what's going on in his own palace. These 108 men that won't go home, who are saying, come on, marry one of us. And all the time they're there, they're eating Odysseus' food. They're eating Penelope's food. They're eating the kingdom out of house and home. The guests that won't go home. And when he goes to investigate this, the goddess Athena disguises him as an old beggar. So he comes in, and the only creature who recognizes who it is when this old beggar, who was once the great war leader in the Trojan War, now comes in as a dirty old ragged beggar, a frail old man that looks as though he's been sleeping in ditches every day of his life. And he comes into the courtyard of his own palace as an old beggar, and the only creature that recognises him is his own old dog. And you know, dogs live not as long as we do. The dog was a young, fit dog when he went away, but he's been away 19 years. And now the dog is an old, worn-out dog that is actually sleeping in the yard on the dunghill, because the dunghill is warm. The old dog is happy to sleep in the dung because the dung is warm. And the poor old dog scrambles up out of the dunghill because he recognises that what looks like the old beggar is in fact his master, the king. The man with whom he used to go hunting when he was a young dog. And he scrambles up, and he's so old and spent, he goes across to the old beggar and he licks the beggar's hand. And then he lies down on the ground, puts his head on his forepaws, and dies. The old dog was the only creature that recognised his master. Nobody else knew who had walked in through the door. So, but in a king's palace at all those times, there would be beggars, because where there are great feasts, there's a lot of leftover food, and beggars can always expect a handout, so there are beggars at the door anyway. In fact, there is a sort of professional beggar in Odysseus' house who tries to drive the old beggar away. And the old beggar is in fact the Greeks' war leader. So at one stage a fight breaks out between the professional beggar and Odysseus. And everybody, the 108 men who've been sitting around looking for entertainment think that's great fun. And they actually see the old beggar knock down the professional beggar. And they say, you can come in, you've knocked out your rival. You can come in, you can beg from any of us, you can have whatever you want. You sit there, old beggar. You're welcome here. And they give him handouts, they give him food. And they don't realise that he is furious to see them there, eating his food, drinking his wine, and chasing his wife. And so the story reaches a climax. Nobody knows, even the king's son, Telemachus, who's 20 years of age, and who still doesn't know that his father has returned. Even Telemachus, his son, who was a baby when he went away, even Telemachus doesn't know. But when the climax of the story comes, Athena, the goddess, tells Odysseus what to do. And Odysseus tells his wife. But the wife still thinks it's an old beggar. The wife sees the beggar and says, where have you been wandering your days, old beggar? Where have you been? What have you seen? And the old beggar, who is in fact her husband, says, I was in Troy at the Trojan Wars. And Penelope, his wife, says, my husband was the war leader in Troy. Did you see him? Do you know of him? And the old beggar, who is Odysseus, says, I saw him. I can tell you of him. So the wife invites the beggar to tell his story. And he still doesn't release who he is, because his name must not be known. His name must not be known. At one point in his journey, Odysseus has an adventure with a huge one-eyed giant. And he tells the one-eyed giant, when he gets his revenge upon the giant says, what is your name, sailor? And Odysseus says, my name is Nobody. My name is Nobody. He won't tell his own name. He says, my name is Nobody, which is no name at all. And when he gets his revenge on the giant, and the giant is calling out with rage and fury and pain, all the other giants say, what's the matter with you? And the giant roars out, nobody is killing me! Nobody is killing me! So the other giants say, well, if nobody's killing you, what are you making all this fuss about? And that's how he gets away. So you've got a man whose name is not known, and now he's got home, he's not even known by his own wife. But the wife says, until my husband comes home, there will be no peace in this house, because all these men want to marry me. And it's gone on for so long. I've got to make up my mind. And the old beggar says, what you should do, lady, is set them the test of the great bow. There is in the house a great treasure, so precious that it was never taken to war. And that precious treasure was a huge, great bow, which gets us back to the bow and arrow guy that asked for the story in the first place. The great bow is brought out in a box. The bow is huge. The man who can bend that bow back enough to fit the string onto it from one side to the other, and can then fire an arrow with that bow through 12 axe heads. 12 axe heads set in a line. These old axes were very strange. They had two blades, one stuck out one side, one stuck out the other side, like butterfly wings. And the handle went up the middle, and on the top of the handle there was a ring to carry the axe bar. They're not like modern axes at all. They have two side blades and a centre shaft where you have the handle, and at the top of the handle there is a carrying ring. So the test of the bow is to fire this huge great weapon through 12 of those axes set in a line with their handles into the ground and the rings all up, one behind the other. I don't know what the size of the ring would be. I've never seen one of these axes. These are archaeological things, you know. But there is a ring at the top, and there are 12 of those rings in a line. And if you can fire through those 12 rings with the great bow, you're as good as Odysseus was. Because he could do it, and nobody else could. So Penelope, the queen, goes to the 108 men who are pestering her to marry, and says, I will marry whichever one of you can string the great bow and pass the test of the 12 axe rings. Fire an arrow. You've got to have a pretty good aim, haven't you, to make sure it doesn't go ping out to the side or miss one. It's got to go straight through the middle of the arrow, of the rings on the top of the axes. And each of the fellas that's been swaggering round, all of whom are younger than Odysseus himself, and don't forget that Odysseus is still disguised as an old, bent, old, wretched old beggar. They all say, right, give me the bow, I'll try. First of all, they've got to put the string on the bow. So they're all... and none of them can even string the bow, let alone fire the bow through the 12 axe rings. They can't string the bow. Pathetic. There's 108 trying and none of them's able to do it. Penelope, the queen, says, my husband was strong enough to do it, but he was a leader in war. You are not the men my husband was. And they're all furious with themselves that they can't do it. And eventually they say, oh, I see, who's that in the corner? It's the old beggar. Let him come and have a try. Let him have a try. He knocked out the other bloke at the door. Give him a go. So they let the old beggar do it. And there's this wonderful moment in the story when we know that the old beggar is only looking like an old beggar because the goddess has put a disguise on him. But in actual fact, this is the moment when he can reveal who he really is. Now, when I was doing this story at the Orchard Wassail, I told all the kids in the audience, I said, here is a man who mustn't have his name known. He's called nobody. He has no name. Because if you call him by his real name, Odysseus, if those guys knew that Odysseus was in the call, they'd kill him. So he mustn't have his name known until the right moment. And the right moment, of course, is when he's got the bow strung ready to use in his hands. I said to all the kids in the front row, I said, when I'm telling you this story, you might recognise it, you might have read it, you might have heard of it before, you might have heard of Ulysses or Odysseus, it's the same man. The Romans called him Ulysses, the Greeks called him Odysseus. The story is 2,000 years old, everybody's heard of the war in Troy and the Trojan horse. I said, there might be a moment when you think, I know the name of this story, I know who this king is. But I said, if you call out his name, he will die. So I said, if you recognise the story and you think you know, you can put your hand up. And all the time I'm telling the stories, kids are putting their hands up. And somebody said, is it Julius Caesar? Is he Julius Caesar? No, he's not Julius Caesar. Eventually, they were getting it. They were getting it. There were people who knew the name of the king and they knew what was going to happen. And they were as tense and excited as though it was really happening in front of them. But right in front of me sat the 11-year-old boy. His name was Ross. And he was the boy who had been the orchard king. So he'd been at the centre of the apple tree ceremony. And he was feeling this was his really glorious night. He was still wearing the great wreath of ivy that he'd worn as the apple tree king. And there he sat in the front row. And he couldn't remember the name. But he was sure he knew it. He's sure he knew the story. And half his friends already knew it and weren't telling him. And he was there. He thought he knew it. And when it came to the moment where Odysseus goes up to his own son and says, I am your father, will you stand by me? I went up to this boy, I went up to the apple tree king, and I said to him, do you know who I am? And he's there going, I think I know, I can't remember the name, but I think I know it. I said, I am your father, will you stand by me? And the boy looked as though he was in the middle of a Star Wars film, he was so excited. And that, of course, is the moment where the old beggar works the bow, bends the bow, strings an arrow, fires straight through all the 12 rings in the axe heads, and then says, right, now let's use the bow a bit more. And he's got two men from his farm, a sheep herd and a cow herd, two of his old faithful servants from the farm who are there helping, and he's also got the goddess. And at this moment the goddess Athena, who you must imagine away up in the rafters in the roof of this great hall, this great feast hall, the goddess suddenly appears, and she has with her the terrifying shield, the great shield with the Medusa's head. The Medusa's head was a horrible mythological creature with snakes for hair. And if you saw that amazing shield, it was terrifying to see the Medusa's head staring at you. It was terrifying to see it. And when the goddess shows you the Medusa shield, wow, you're frightened! So that's the moment where the goddess reveals the golden shield with the Medusa's head. And Telemachus the son, and the cowherd, and the sheep man, and Odysseus the old beggar, who's now throwing off his disguise, start to get their own back on the fellows in the hall. And they slaughter the lot of them. And that was the way the story went. And do you know, I did all that because this guy the previous year had said to me, I want a story about archery. And I went through all this story. It took me 40 minutes to tell the whole blooming thing. And the fella who'd asked for that story wasn't even there. He'd not shown up.